Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another edition, and I am really excited to have a very special guest on. There's a little bit of time difference between where Prince lives and where I live. Like what, maybe about 11 or 12 hours because I'm mountain time. Well, maybe not quite that much, but close. So I'm speaking with Prince in Sarpong.
Correct.
Is that the right
That's
pronunciation?
Right. Yes.
Who lives in South Africa. And I met Prince at the Financial Therapy Association conference. I was walking up the stairs to go into the lobby, and Prince was there saying, "Are you Rick Kahler?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And I asked him where he is from. And of course, I got all excited. I have visited South Africa a couple of times, and it's a fascinating country. And so his topic at the conference was African psychology. And that is so intriguing to me because I might just know just a teeny tiny bit about that, but I thought it would be so interesting to expose that to all of our listeners. So, Prince, welcome.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for having me.
So why don't we just start, because I know you have a lot to say. How did you get to where you're at? You're a professor in a university,
yes,
correct?
Senior lecturer, yes.
And how did you get into being interested in financial therapy?
Right, so it's quite an interesting journey. So when I did my PhD in finance, a great part of my doctoral thesis actually focused on behavioral finance. And I practiced a little bit as a financial planner. And so, in South Africa and of course in the world as a whole, we've seen a shift in financial planning going more to the behavioral side. So being in the field, it was just something that I just had to, build on. And so I have been actually researching and writing around behavioral finance for quite a while. And I would say I did eventually stumble on financial therapy. When I read I think one of the most popular books yet in financial therapy, that is Financial Therapy Theories and Practices. And so that got me very interested. It resonated in lots of ways with me. And then, of course, after that, I've read quite a couple of other books as well, including yours on financial therapy. And I could see its practical implications. And so it got me, interested in the field of financial therapy, which led me to join the FTA. And then, of course, I hope to join and be a more active and participating member. So I eventually joined the Equity and Inclusion Committee of the Financial Therapy Association. So the long and short of it is that, I just found it very relatable, very practical. And also it has real life, applicability, which, ultimately got me interested. And then I started, starting to research more about it, to also study more about financial therapy, and also to then ask myself, what could be, as an academic, my contribution, to the field. And that is what led me to my presentation at the FTA conference in Charlotte.
So I'm just kind of jumping with the excitement here as you talk, because I just had the realization you're the first academic that I've had on the podcast.
Oh, wow.
And I love the connection, the practical, logical connection that you're making with financial therapy, that it has this very practical and more and more research-based evidence around its effectiveness, etc., which is one of the strengths I have as a planner, is bringing this message of money and emotions to planners, because I have a really good left brain. And I thought there's no place for emotions and feelings in financial planning back in '89. No way. But what really swung me was all of the research and evidence that we need to start learning more how the brain works and how humans work, and et cetera, et cetera. So you bring that component, which I think is fascinating, to come from that viewpoint, and necessary. So tell me a little bit more about the blending of African psychology with financial therapy. What's that connection?
Yes, so I think that's one of the questions I always get whenever I talk. So it's a field I'm working on now. It's a new research I'm embarking on, which hopefully is going to end up in a book. To kind of bring in a lot more of the African psychological content into financial therapy. It had an interesting start. So last year, I did a presentation online at the FTA conference where I talked about black tax. Now, black tax is a phenomenon here in South Africa, where due to the past injustices of apartheid and also the current systemic, injustices, we have black people, particularly the young black professionals and mostly graduates, finding themselves in huge financial distress because they have to take care of, extended family who, due to the past injustices, did not have opportunities to be, self-sustaining. Now, black tax, in a way, has some similarities with the concept as it's known in the United States, but it also has its own unique, uniqueness. And so, in researching this phenomenon, my objective was to look at the psychological impact. In fact, the unintended psychological consequences of black tax, and looking at it from the frame of financial therapy to see whether, I can identify some of the identified money scripts and also money disorders, in the conversations around black tax. And so I looked at a book which is called Black Tax, Burden or Ubuntu, and I'll touch on Ubuntu very soon, where this book had a very rich contribution from different authors who happen to be very, influential individuals in South Africa, talking about their own experiences with black tax. And so I started analyzing their content to see, what are some of the possible money scripts and money disorders that could be identified within conversations around black tax. And halfway into this research, I found myself asking an interesting question where it felt like if I were to apply the existing identified, money scripts and money disorders, and also, of course, some of the recommendations in financial planning to the phenomena of black tax, I might end up unintentionally creating more distress, than actually solving. And so I have to pause and then relook at the whole situation again. And what I've found with black tax, and I think it resonates with certain, behaviors as well, not just with black tax, was that in most cases we are likely to hear, discussions like, especially within financial therapy, what is your relationship with money? And then the person then goes on to unravel, the relationship with money. It may go back to their past, their childhood, etc., which is all good. And I think it's a very potent approach. But with black tax, and I think it resonates with other phenomena. I haven't identified many of them though. What I saw was that it is not the relationship with money that is the problem. So, in other words, it is not a problematic or a disordered relationship with money. It is rather a disorder or a dysfunction that money introduces into relationships. So, it may just sound like a reversal, but once you really look at it, you find that, wow, this is quite another thing where the individual, that is experiencing black tax, in most cases has a lot of feelings or emotions all, jumbled up together. So there's an element of, in fact, positivity and excitement even within that financially distressful situation, as well as a feeling where one does not really know whether it's actually a negative or positive feeling. And of course, the financial distress itself, introduces the negative, feeling. So there is this psychological and emotional issue at play, which is, mixed up. A bit of positivity, negativity, and then something in between. So the question then becomes, how do I, if I'm discussing the concept with any black professional, for example, how do I bring in some of the concepts in financial therapy to help such a person? And it occurred to me in my readings around it that, in fact, the most helpful approach would be, in addition to what we know or what we are still unraveling in financial therapy, we need to resort to African psychology. Now, African psychology.
So, Peter, I'm calling you Peter. Starts with a P.
Yes, starts with a P.
I interviewed Peter a month or so on the podcast. Right. And so Prince, let me make sure that I'm getting this. First of all, the black tax is the financial burden that is put on black people because of the legacy, the history that has enforced the lack of development of financing, the poverty, just everything that's kept them trapped.
Correct.
In this socioeconomic strata.
Yes.
And so there is the part of that is helping, taking care of family.
Yes.
And also being probably under earning themselves, right?
Yes,
so that correct. The black tax comes from apartheid, I would think. Or
absolutely, yes, mainly.
Yes. So, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And then I was just captured when you said, and looking at money scripts and applying some of the philosophy that we have as Americans and around this, that could actually maybe cause even more problems in the way it's applied, because it's not a problem with money, is what I heard you said.
Yes.
It's not a problem with the relationship with money.
Correct.
It's a problem that comes from the introduction of money
Into the relationship.
into the relationship.
Yes.
And that I'm kind of struck by that. I'm doing a presentation in another week to a group, and I'm going to start off with what comes up when I say money. And write down the first 5 words that come up, and they'll do that. And in 2/3 of the case, they'll be not very good words. And I will ask, so if that's your main love relationship, how's your relationship with money? Which means it's pretty bad. But I love the idea. I mean, the title of this podcast is It's Not Just About the Money. And I would almost say it's never about the money. It's about everything surrounding the projection on money.
Yes.
And definitely the relationships, because I'm thinking of money as being a neutral. Neutral. Money isn't good. Money isn't evil.
It's not bad. Yeah. Yes.
It just is. It's just money.
Yeah. It's just money.
So interjecting money into a relationship, of course, now there's all sorts of projections and traumas that are coming up around that money that certainly by each individual that certainly impact relationships between people.
Yes.
Do I kind of am I getting it?
Yes, you're getting it. Yes, you absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So continue on. I'm very interested about Ubuntu.
Yes,
Ubuntu.
Yes. So it all then goes back to, whilst I was trying to understand and trying to, quote unquote, diagnose, because I'm not really a practitioner, the situation in the book they've written, I found that, for example, there is this one author who talks about her elder brother who doesn't work and he likes to drink and never keeps a job. So basically, whenever he gets money, he drinks it away. He comes back to depend on her. And so the writing sounds a bit stressful, and then it shifts abruptly into almost excitement, which is quite, strange. When on one hand, you're talking about your financial stresses, so then she goes on to say, but it's wonderful to see how she's able to take care of family. And then she goes then to say something which resonates with a lot of South Africans and Africans in general, in varying degrees, where she then says that this brother of hers is like a living ancestor, and then goes on to make a joke around it. But actually, if one were to look at it, you might say this is financial enabling, where you keep providing financial resource to an individual who keeps constantly abusing it and coming back to you. But she is not looking at the money element of it. So she lightheartedly makes reference to the ancestors, but it actually has a bigger implication than she even may care to admit. And that is all because of the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which essentially says that we are all interconnected in a way. So we are connected with nature, we are connected with each other, and we are connected, of course, with our ancestors and the universe as a whole. So African psychology essentially applies the African philosophical tenets of relationality and cosmodinity. So it is not about the money itself. It's about her being a person, her being in harmony with people around her, her being in harmony, of course, with the greater, universe. So she's not just enabling the brother, she's only doing her part, within a system where we are all interconnected. So if you then provide an advice that essentially cuts off the brother, you are solving a financial problem, but you are creating a bigger psychological distress, because what is going to happen down the line is the question of her being, you know, because Ubuntu loosely translates into I am because you are, because we are. And it stresses harmony. And so a way to deal with it would be then to understand the need for harmony, and then possibly then rope in concepts in family therapy, for example, to then help the other party understand how he creates this harmony in the relationship. So we are all interconnected, and the only time that we are distressed, according to African psychology and African philosophy, is when we are in disharmony. So it could be a disharmony with nature, disharmony with our relationships with people, disharmony even with our ideals. So I've forgotten the term, but Adam Grant put it quite succinctly when he talks about the value action fit. Yes, value action fit, where even in the United States, the majority of people agree that family is one of the most important things to them. And yet we are most likely to hear, stories about a person on his or her deathbed or their deathbed, regretting not spending time with family. So what we are seeing, in fact, is that even though deep down inside us as human beings, we value family, for the most part, our actions actually put family second or third. And that's because in our quest to find meaning to life, we find this meaning mostly through work, because work brings meaning. And it's always, well, to some extent, to the detriment of other sources of finding meaning. So yes, we find meaning through work and the wealth that work brings, but over time, we forget the other means through which we find meaning to life, which is relationships. So as we live against our own inherent ideals, it creates a disharmony. So a disharmony within ourselves, which then brings this financial stress, because we live possibly in the most affluent era of human history, and yet we are also possibly the most distressed, because we are also the most in this harmony with nature, in this harmony with our ideals, in this harmony with people around us. And this is also scientifically proven, where studies upon studies have now begun to show that loneliness, for example, is a major risk factor and the number one cause of suicide amongst men in the United States. Now, loneliness clearly is a disharmony with the people that matter to us. I am because you are because we are. So, in our quest to pursue wealth, in our quest to find meaning, sometimes we forget that meaning comes not just from work and wealth, which is important. So it is not an either or, but we need to also make sure that it is in tune with our innate desires, innate ideals. And since majority of us claim that family and essentially people around us matter most, when our actions prove otherwise, it creates disharmony, and this disharmony essentially is what creates the stress and the depression that we possibly are facing.
Well, you have a little bit to unpack and all that. That's fascinating. I mean, we could. I want to be clear on the Ubuntu.
Ubuntu, yes.
I am because you are.
You are because
we are. Okay,
Correct.
Great. I belonged to a study group once that took the name Ubuntu. That was the name of our study group.
Oh.
And it's because one of our members, who was president of the Financial Planning Association at that time, visited South Africa.
Oh.
and she was introduced to this concept of Ubuntu. And we loved it so much that we adopted that as a name. So that's my whole introduction to African psychology.
African psychology.
But just some fascinating things talking about this disharmony and with the enabling of looking at it in the bigger picture of being in harmony, of supporting usually a family member. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I'm wondering in that, because I'm looking at it from a very Western point of view of what's I mean, I'm guessing it's in the mindset of, okay, I'm suffering, or it's I may not be doing myself a financial service, but I am helping this other person. I'm going right to what's the responsibility of the other person to create harmony
correct,
within their system?
Yes. And so that is where, again, I bring back African psychology, because there's a lot of misinterpretation around Ubuntu, where that harmony, because of how it's misinterpreted, is also abused. So from this perspective, the question that we ask then is, and the principle of Ubuntu does not say, sacrificing yourself and your goals, including your financial goals, for the greater, community, or to maintain the harmony. It is not one person's responsibility to maintain the harmony. So where there is a disharmony which is not coming from your side, there are a couple of approaches to deal with this within the framework of Ubuntu, to say it is your responsibility, being part of this whole system, to notify this source of disharmony that this is what you are bringing into the system. So mind you, it's not just a relationship between the sister and the brother. There's an element of transcendence beyond just the two. And so if one's behavior is causing financial distress on the other, the person is actually also creating disharmony, not just between two individuals, but it's creating disharmony in the greater, interconnected relationship. And so it becomes a responsibility of whoever is creating this disharmony to redress it. And where the person does not redress it, it is your duty in keeping this harmony positive and flowing and alive to then deal with it. So it's almost going back to the same, solution of obviously having to create boundaries, having to, well, for lack of a better word, crack the whip. But it should be within the context of still maintaining harmony. So the person then who eventually takes control of his or her financial situation or financial future does not go out feeling distressed for creating this harmony, but understanding that, the creation of harmony sometimes also means having to set a certain boundaries to then push out the element that introduces this harmony. Because again, your responsibility of maintaining this harmony is not just between you and the other party, but it's also between you, the ancestors, and the universe as a whole. So it's not all, happy-go-lucky kind of, it's all let me sacrifice for the greater good. It also means you are required as per the ideals of Ubuntu and creating this harmony and keeping it flowing to deal with this.
Well, thanks for listening, and we'll continue this conversation next week.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, Rick.
Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.